G'day everyone and welcome back. Oh my god, it has been so long since I've been able to do any work on the bus. We have just had another crazy amount of rain here in Queensland. We're all just a bit over it, to be honest. Anyway, this week we are finally getting some patches of sunshine, which means I can come back outside and start doing some work on the bus. And the next job that I'm going to be doing is to put up the final layer of insulation inside the bus, and then I'm going to start putting up the wall lining. Now, you may have seen one of my previous videos where I showed how I did the initial stage of my insulation in the bus, which was to install foil board into all the cavities between the frame. So this is all the green stuff that you can see around me. I used 25mm thick sheets of foil board and put them into all the cavities in between the frame. Now, the next layer of insulation that I'm going to be putting on is this stuff here. It's called Ametalin Thermalbreak, and it's similar to the foil board in that it's got like a foam core and reflective foil on either side, but as you can see it's quite a lot thinner and it's also a lot more flexible. Comes in a big roll that's about 1300 wide and 22 odd meters long. It's not cheap. I think I paid about 290 something for this roll from Bunnings, but this one roll should be enough to do the entire bus, hopefully. And there are two main reasons why I'm putting a layer of this over the top of the foil board. The first reason is because the foil board is only insulating the cavities in the frame. So it's only insulating the parts of the frame that are in between the roof beams and between the metal frame of the bus and the walls. So all of the bits of metal frame that are in between the foil board sheets are actually still exposed. They're just covered up with insulation tape at the moment, but they're not actually insulated. So I plan to put a layer of this over the entire thing, including the frame, which means that those sections will have a little bit of insulation. So that's the first reason. And the second reason, and I guess the main reason why I'm wanting to do this, is to create a vapor barrier. One of the biggest problems for anyone living in a bus or a van or a vehicle of any sort is condensation. So the bus is basically a big metal box, and when you've got people living inside it, just moving around, breathing out warm air, doing cooking and so on, the warm air that's generated, warm moist air that's generated inside the bus, if it was to come into contact with the metal skin of the bus, you'd get condensation forming, and obviously in a vehicle that's the last thing you want. If that condensation is allowed to sit there and run down into the cavities in the frame, then you've got big problems with rust, with mold, etc., etc. So the challenge is to try and prevent the warm, moist air that's going to be accumulating inside the bus, trying to prevent that from coming into contact with the outer skin of the bus. There's a video that I saw recently that does an exceptional job of demonstrating why having a vapor barrier is so important. It's by a gentleman called Virgoe, who lives in the UK and has lots of videos on converting camper vans and so on. He explains insulation very well. I'll put a link to this video in the description below so you can check it out, because it really demonstrates what happens when you don't have a vapor barrier in place and the difference that a vapor barrier does actually make. So go and watch that video and you'll have a better understanding of why I'm trying to do this in my bus. I'm going to cover the entire ceiling. I'm going to be covering all the walls as much as I can. Obviously, I need to keep the windows free. There will be some sections at the back where the tail light assemblies are. I need to be able to access them. I'm not going to be able to seal those up. And also obviously at the front where the dash and the driver's cabin area is a little bit tricky as well. But I'm going to do my best to create as much of a seal as I can, at least in the main living space of the bus. It won't be perfect, but hopefully it will be enough to minimize any problems with condensation. So I have just spent the last 2 days installing all of these battens in the walls of the bus, because that's what I'm going to be using to attach not only the Ametalin Thermalbreak insulation to, but also the ply that I'm going to be using for my interior wall linings. Firstly, what I did was I installed 4 longitudinal battens the entire length of the bus. So I've got one just above the level of the floor all the way along. I've got another one at the level of the windowsill. I've got a third one along the top above the windows, just level with the top of that bit of the frame. And then I've got a fourth one running along the roof like that. And I've done the same on both sides. And each of those four I've sickered, so I've glued them onto the frame, and I've also screwed them in with self-drilling metal screws. So those four rails there are pretty well secured to the metal frame of the bus. Like, they're not going anywhere. And the reason I did that was because those four longitudinal rails are what I'm going to be attaching the bulk of my furniture to. So all my cabinets, my interior walls, they will all be screwed into the one of or more of these four. So I wanted them to be really secure. And then in between, I've put a few vertical studs. Now with these ones, just because of the distance between where they needed to be, and I couldn't just screw them straight into the frame because this wall is actually curved a little bit. So you'll see here that even though at the top of these I was able to screw it directly into the frame, that because of the curve of the wall, if I wanted it in line with these ones, it actually stuck out a little bit from the wall. So what I did was, in most cases I was able to screw them directly into the frame at the top, but in some of them I've just used a spacer. Just put a little bit of 9mm ply behind it and screwed through into that. And some of them, like you'll see here, where I wasn't able to do that, I used plates. So I got these steel plates and screwed them in to help support. So now these vertical ones here, they're pretty secure, but they're not as secure as the horizontal ones that are glued and screwed directly into the frame. But I'm not concerned about that because these vertical ones are purely just to give me somewhere to attach the wall lining to. They're not going to be needed to support any actual internal walls or cabinetry or anything like that. So I've just put in studs where I needed to, based on where my ply sheets are going to come to. So I've done all of that. And now I'm ready to start installing this. So my plan with this is to put a single piece underneath the windows the whole way along on each side, and then at the back here where I've got full height walls that'll be blocked off, let's come back a bit so you can see, I'll have another piece of the Ametalin coming from here down, and it'll overlap this section on the bottom a bit here. So I'm going to do that first, and then once all the insulation is up, then I can come along and cover this with some ply. And I think once the wall linings are up, it's going to look pretty schmick. It might actually start looking a little bit more like a house than a bus, hopefully. Anyway, that's the plan. Let's get cracking. There's not a lot of space to work with in here. The good thing about this Ametalin too is that it's really easy to cut with just a decent pair of sharp scissors. Or you could probably cut it with a Stanley knife. You'll notice how on one side of the sheet there's this little flap here, and that's designed to act as an overlap, so when you're butting up the panels of this stuff together, you can tape this overlap over the join. It's only on one side, but I'm actually going to be using this particularly when I come to do the ceiling and the tops of the walls and so on. I'll be able to utilize that. but it's not really going to have any impact on the sections that I'm doing first. It would probably be a lot easier to do this outside the bus, but because it's still really wet and muddy and horrible outside, it's safer to do it in here. Beautiful. Now, the way I'm going to be attaching this for now is just to use some double-sided tape that I'm going to stick to my wall battens, and this will just press up against it. The tape that I'm using is this stuff. It's Bear brand double-sided tape. It's heavy-duty, super sticky stuff. This is actually designed for sticking down carpet tiles and rugs and that to a floor to stop it slipping. So it's really sticky, and it'll do a good job of holding this up on the walls until I'm actually ready to nail the ply onto it. A little bit tricky because I've got to try and cut it up and over the wheel arch. Okay, well, that's one side done. It's very rough around the wheel arch. I'm not totally worried about that because I'm actually going to be covering the wheel arches themselves with some of this as well, hopefully, if I've got a bit left over. So hopefully I'll be able to seal that up a little bit better. Now I'm going to trim off this flap because I obviously don't need it on this section here, so I'll just trim that off. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. This is what it looks like so far. Got most of the side walls done now. And you can see here how I've used this overlap section. So I'll actually be able to tape that down over the top, and that'll create a really nice seal between the joins. I still have to work out exactly how I'm going to seal this little bit in here. But so far, I'm pretty happy with that. This back wall was a bit tricky, but I'll just show you how I've decided to frame it. I've just screwed some pieces of pine along the top here, so they're both glued and screwed into the back wall of the bus. And then on each side, because of the curve, it's really an awkward kind of thing to frame out, but I wanted to have something to help attach the Ametalin to. And also when I come to frame this back corner, I needed some points of attachment. So what I've done is I've just got 3 lengths of pine, and they're screwed into the frame at the top and the bottom, and they're pretty sturdy. Like, they're not going anywhere. That'll be more than enough to attach other things to if I need. And I've done the same on this side. Put a couple of lengths of pine in there. This bottom section down here, I haven't quite decided exactly how I'm going to frame that out yet. This back section is quite tricky because of the sort of layout I've got in my bus. I'm having my bathroom at the very back. The shower's going to be here in the middle, and so I need to be able to frame around that, seal all this off, but also keep the access to the taillights free. So for now, I'm going to leave that section free. I won't be covering that with Ametalin. I'll have to do that at a later stage once I've got the shower base in and I know exactly how I'm going to frame that out. But I'm pretty happy with this back section now. I can go ahead and put the Ametalin sheet over the top. I'm going to be screwing in some other battens going up this way that I'll be able to use to attach my ceiling to later on, but that will go over the top of the Ametalin. So this is just the framework that I wanted to have screwed into the wall of the bus before the Ametalin sheet goes on. Well guys, it's taken me a few days. Like most things with this bus, everything takes longer than you think it's going to, but I've finally finished all the insulation, so let me show you what it looks like. I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I've managed to cover just about all of the main living area in the bus pretty well. So as you can see, I had enough left over to cover the wheel arches. I'm leaving these bits here, which were the original anchor points for the seats on top of the wheels. I'm leaving them free just because I want to use them when I come to build a couple of internal walls. I also kept all the pieces of that flap that I cut off from the sections where I wasn't using it. And what I did with the leftovers was I actually, where I had the join between the ceiling panel and the curved panel on the wall, I did tape over that join, but then I also came along and put a strip of the flap over it and taped that up. So that join there along the top of the ceiling has got like essentially a double layer of the vapor barrier. So hopefully that will give it a really good seal. I've tried as best I can to seal up all the edges. For the large gaps I had in front of the windows, I just cut another scrap piece of the Thermalbreak to fit in there and taped it all up. So it seems to be sealed quite nicely. I do still have quite a few holes that are visible in the frame of the bus, but I'm leaving these till later because I'm just not 100% sure yet what I'm going to do with these sections above the windows. There will be overhead cabinets along here, and underneath that I plan to have some curtains. So until I figure out exactly how I'm going to be framing and trimming this area, I'm just going to leave the holes for now. So like I said earlier, it's pretty hard to get a perfect seal in a bus like this, but hopefully what I've done with this layer of insulation will be enough to help minimize any problems that I have with condensation when I'm on the road. And now that this is all done, I can go ahead and start putting up the wall lining. So stay tuned for that.